I sometimes see discussions around forums and in the comment section here about the merits of using studio monitors versus hi-fi speakers. Recently, a commenter on a video of mine was under the impression that active speakers can't really be used as hi-fi speakers, as in like proper 2-channel premium sound speakers. I completely understand where he or she would have gotten that impression from, because that sentiment is easy to find all over the internet, but that doesn't mean that it's right. After all, there's lots on the internet that's a bit dubious. Another sentiment that I sometimes see, and I also disagree with, is that you have to spend megabucks to get really enjoyable sound. Sure, you can often get better sound by judiciously spending more money, but better sound doesn't always mean more enjoyable sound. For example, I can enjoy music just as much through a pair of $60 Rock Lobster IEMs as I can through a pair of $5,000 flagship headphones. The experience is different, but I can enjoy the music through both. And to bring this back to speakers, a great speaker is a great speaker. And what I mean by that is that a cheaper speaker can still sound great. A more expensive speaker might just sound even greater, but both can be super enjoyable. And then to circle back to the idea of studio monitors versus hi-fi speakers, it is true that the very neutral or flat tuning of studio monitors can be less enjoyable for some people. But having said that, I prefer the more neutral, flat-tuned version of the Edifier MR5 speakers over their other mode, which is called music mode and is a little bit more V-shaped. It's a little bit like the effect of pressing the loudness button on an old stereo receiver. But the best thing about the MR5 speakers from Edifier is that you can also run them in a third mode, which allows you to tune them however you want them. And that's done very, very easily with a couple of dials on the back of the master speaker or via the companion app or a combination of both. And that versatility makes the Edifier MR5 a do-it-all speaker. You can use them as a reference speaker for mixing or editing, or just for fun to see what the music sounds like in a very flat tuning. And then, with just the press of a button, you can turn them into your very own perfectly tuned speaker for an enjoyment-first listening experience. For $350, the Edifier MR5s are incredibly affordable when you think about what's included. They're an active speaker, they've got lots of different inputs, and they're highly tunable both to your room and the acoustics of your room, but also to your personal tastes. Edifier sent me this pair to check out, but they have no influence over this video. Instead, this video is kindly sponsored by Final Audio, and specifically their brand new groundbreaking earphones. While we're talking about reference type sound and speakers and audio devices that can be tuned to make sure they measure nice and flat, these new wireless IEMs are a great example. These new wireless IEMs, which I think are pronounced tonalité, do something that I don't think any other IEM on the market can do. I've spoken before on this channel about the fact that we all hear differently due to our physical hearing anatomy. That includes the shapes and sizes of our ears and our ear canals, but also the shapes and sizes of our heads have an impact on what we hear, and therefore what sounds right and wrong to our ears. And just like the Edifier MR5s allow you to adjust their sound to suit your room, the Final Audio Tonalité IEMs will adjust their sound to suit your body's anatomy. They start off by using a companion app on your smartphone to do a 3D scan of your head, and then they can add to that an acoustic measurement of the resonances inside your ear canals. The result will be that you will hear the exact tuning that the engineers at Final Audio wanted from these IEMs. That's as opposed to what you get with most IEMs, where you're hearing a version of the tuning that the engineers wanted you to hear after it's been filtered and changed by the size and shape of your ears and ear canals. I'll be reviewing these groundbreaking IEMs as soon as I get my hands on a pair, so be sure to subscribe if you want to understand more about this 3D scanning process and the measurement of the acoustics of your ear canals. I'll explain all of that in the review, but I didn't want to wait to tell you about these IEMs because they're going to be available very soon. In fact, they should be right now as you're watching this via Kickstarter for what's essentially a pre-order process. These will retail for $329 once they're formally released, but the first 500 people to buy them via the Kickstarter will receive a 25% discount, And then everybody else after that will be able to get a 15% discount for that pre-order through Kickstarter. And I'm specifying the term pre-order because it's not like a Kickstarter where we don't know if the product's going to be made. These are designed, these are finished, these are ready to go, and they'll all be shipped as soon as the campaign on Kickstarter ends, before they're then released widely and generally in around about mid-October at the full retail price of $329 US. And so use the link in the description down below to go through the Kickstarter, and remember to act fast if you want the 25% discount on these, or if it's too late for that, you can still get 15% discount even if the first 500 pledges are gone, because it's a great way to get a discount on what might be the most technologically groundbreaking IEM that we've seen for some time. They're also, by the way, true wireless and active noise cancelling too. And so stay tuned for the full review. Use the links for now if you just want to grab a hold of these at the best possible price. But for now, let's get back to the Edifier MR5s. With a pair of these speakers and a DAC, you have everything you need for a full 2-channel system. You don't need any extra amps or preamps, and you maybe don't even need a subwoofer. They also have Bluetooth capabilities for receiving audio from, say, a smartphone or a computer, and that's a surprisingly handy feature because of the way it works. For example, you could be listening to tunes streamed via Bluetooth from your phone, while hearing gaming audio from your computer or console via the wired inputs on the MR5s. They will play back both sources at the same time, which can be really cool and handy. You could also very easily switch seamlessly from a video call on your computer to maybe watching a YouTube video on your phone. One of those sources would be wired into the analog inputs, probably your computer, and the other would be Bluetooth, such as your phone. Another thing you could be doing is having premium audio streamed exclusively into your external high-quality DAC and then connected up to the MR5s, whilst also still being able to get access to things like notifications from your computer, general system sounds, via a Bluetooth connection if your computer has one. So there are many and versatile ways to use the MR5s and their different connection options, but at the same time, the Edifier MR3s, which are cheaper, can do all of that too, so why would you buy the MR5s? The MR5s seem to have the same tweeter, the same mid-range, and all the same tuning and general circuitry as the MR3s, which are cheaper, and so at first glance they may look the same. But there's one thing that the MR5s do better, and that's bass. In addition to the tweeter and the mid-range which is shared between these models, the MR5s also have a third internal amplifier and a down-firing woofer that uses ports out the side of each speaker. You can see them here to generate, theoretically, better bass performance than the smaller MR3. As for the result, let's talk a bit about that. Edifier quote a flat frequency response on the MR5s all the way from 46 Hz to 40 kHz. That might be true in their specific measuring setup, maybe an anechoic room with professional microphones, but I think in the real world, most people are never going to actually hear that performance. Using some close mic'd measurements to try to take my room and the acoustics of my room out of the measurements of the MR5s, I couldn't get a flat response out of these past about the 98 Hz mark. In other words, the bass started to drop away quite rapidly everywhere below about 100 Hz. Now, I'm not saying this to suggest that Edifier are lying in their marketing, just that what is measured in a laboratory somewhere and what we hear in the real world are sometimes a little bit different. And it's also important to note that my measurement setup is far from a professional setup. I use the Mini DSP UMic 1 for my measurements into Room EQ Wizard. However, my listening tests would also suggest that you're not really going to be hearing 46 Hz tones, not at the same level at least as the rest of the frequency bands. There is on the back of one of the speakers, the master speaker if you call it that, a couple of dials here where you can boost and cut the bass and treble. If you use the bass dial here, plus some judicious use of the EQ in the companion app, you can get better bass out of the MR5s. But that figure I told you before of the 98 Hz before it started to roll off, that was made with the bass dial turned to full and a 3 dB boost at 62 Hz on the equalizer of the MR5s. In that type of setup, the roll-off below 100 Hz is about 6 decibels per octave all the way down to 30 Hz. But the problem with that kind of setup is that boosting the bass that much on the MR5s generates quite a lot of port noise out those side-firing ports. In case you're thinking after hearing that the MR5s are a rip-off and they're not worth it and they don't do great bass, I think it's important to put these a bit more into context and perspective. The fact that these don't really perform in the real world all the way down to 46 Hz doesn't suddenly mean that they're rubbish. Instead, what it should do is remind us that they're very affordable and relatively compact speakers. For their price and their size, they're actually very, very good in a number of other ways that we should be focusing on. They produce a really nice sonic image and a very clean and crisp sound. They deliver vocals that are very well focused in the soundstage and with a good sense of clarity and texture as well. I also find their treble to be well controlled, and all of that is shown in the measurements too. These are actually an excellent performing speaker if we forget about the bass for a moment. From 100 Hz up, they're a really nice speaker that you can get to sound very linear, or you can tune it to be a bit more musical if you want to. And in fact, the only thing that gives the MR5s away as not being worth maybe 2 to 3 times their price is that they're not the most refined sounding speaker up top. They're far from bad, but you can hear that they're not a super duper pricey speaker. In other words, they're a huge step up from any other basic kind of computer style speaker, the sorts of things you might get from a brand like Creative or Logitech. I don't know if Creative still makes speakers, but once upon a time I had a pair of their kind of high-end computer sort of multimedia speakers. The Edifiers are well and truly beyond something like that. However, on the other hand, they don't quite approach the lower end entry-level models from brands like Atom Audio or KRK that are more professional type brands. But I do think it's really cool that you can get a proper reference style sound out of a pair of active monitors for less than $350 or at $350. If we factor in that a little bit of roll-off down low doesn't matter too much, you're going to be essentially getting the truth from these all the way down to about 70 Hz or so. Now, in order to achieve that, you will have to adjust them a little bit to suit your room, but that's done very easily through the companion app that you pair up with the Edifier MR5s. And as I said before, that's going to allow you to adjust an equalizer in the application. That's got 9 bands of adjustment, and I think it's got a plus 3 dB and maybe a minus 2 dB. I actually didn't check the cut on it. But going beyond that, there are also a couple of more broad adjustments, one of which is going to deal with the placement of the speakers in the room, to deal with it if you've got them, say, in a corner or close to a wall and you're getting too much bass boost. Or another adjustment is for if you've placed them on a desk, where you might start to get a little bit of boost in a couple of different frequency ranges. It's going to cut those out for you fairly effectively. As you can see from the graphs I've put on screen, the range of adjustments are quite varied, and that means that you're going to be able to tailor the sound of the MR5s to suit most rooms. I had excellent results here in my very modestly treated office, and they sounded like an excellent neutral reference monitor. And so having spent a bunch of time with the Edifier MR5s, listening to music, watching videos, editing videos, adjusting the audio in those videos, and therefore needing a good reference tonality from these, I think they're really excellent in a couple of specific scenarios. One such situation is if you've got a nice quality streamer, maybe you've got an Eversolar DMPA6 or a WiiM Pro Plus, for instance, that gives you a good quality variable analog output, or even a fixed level analog output because the Edifiers have volume control on board. You could take one of those streamers and pair it up with a pair of the MR5s, and that's all you need for a super minimalist and very enjoyable sound system that's going to cost you well under $1,000 if we're talking about the WiiM streamer. In other words, you don't need an external DAC, you don't need an external preamp or integrated or power amps. Just a single box streamer and a pair of speakers, you've got a full hi-fi system. In that type of setup, if bass is important to you, you'll probably want to prioritize putting the MR5s close to walls and or into the corners to get a natural boost of bass from your room. Or of course, you could consider going out and buying a sub to add to that system. The point is the MR5s in the right placement can just scrape by without a sub. And then another great possibility for the MR5s is if you are looking to get into music creation, editing and adjustment of audio, and your budget is somewhat limited, these are a brilliant option to get you started. With just a little bit of tuning that's fairly easily done with the app, you can get a marvelously referenced tonality out of the MR5s. And then, as I said before, the only thing holding these back from competing with higher level brands like Atom Audio, Head Audio, KRK, etc., Genelec too, of course, is that you're not going to get quite the level of refinement and nuance and insight from these, but tonally, they are absolutely excellent with a little bit of tuning. And the tuning is only necessary to adapt to your room. Out of the box, they're actually very, very good straight away. Now, one small tip, if you are looking at these as an entry into mixing or editing of music or production of sound, you probably will want to get yourself a decent headphone-based chain that's going to give you a little bit more insight into the music. As I've already said, these are an affordable speaker. They're not going to give you all the detail, insight and clarity that you might want to hear the finest details and pick up the tiniest errors, but they're going to be very good for your general mixes, getting your tonality right, and just, as I said, general monitoring of audio. And so I think if you buy the MR5s with the right set of expectations, you're going to be really happy with them. I don't think it's fair to expect them to produce the sort of bass that the marketing suggests they will, but if you're happy to get a pair of speakers that are clear, crisp, have excellent imaging, and very good tonal performance from, say, 80 Hz upwards, I think these are fantastic. And so as always, I'll put links in the description in case these sound like a good match for you. And I'll also pin my video here at the end of the smaller MR3s, which are a bit cheaper, but otherwise do almost everything the MR5s do, other than go quite as deep on the bass. And so if you're looking at a system that's going to have a pair of monitors and a sub, or subs, the MR3s might be a better choice because you can save some money there and put more money into the sub. So watch that video next, but until next time, peace, love, and music, and I'll see you again soon.